My name is Victoria Hayes, and I'm 73 years old. I've lived in the quiet suburbs of Boston my entire life, watching the seasons change over the same streets, the same houses, the same memories. For 48 years, I worked as an architectural designer, pouring my heart into creating spaces where families could build their dreams. I thought I had done everything right. I worked hard, I saved every dollar I could, and I raised my son Daniel to be a good man. But standing there on that frozen driveway in early December, with the bitter wind cutting through my thin coat, I realized that somewhere along the way, everything had gone terribly wrong. So it all started 10 minutes earlier. The sound of my vintage leather handbag hitting the icy pavement rang out like a gunshot in the silent neighborhood. That bag had been with me for 35 years. It had accompanied me to business meetings in New York, to the hospital when my husband Richard passed away 3 years ago, and to every milestone in Daniel's life. Now it was lying face down in a puddle of freezing slush in the driveway of the house I had designed and built with my own vision and sweat. Marcus Chen stood in the doorway of my home, blocking the warmth that poured out from inside. My son-in-law. He was wearing a designer sweater that probably cost more than my monthly pension, and his face was twisted into an expression of cold contempt. He looked at me like I was something dirty he'd stepped in, not the woman who had welcomed him into our family 8 years ago with open arms and genuine hope for my daughter's happiness. "Time's up, Victoria," Marcus said, his voice flat and emotionless. "The bank's coming tomorrow. This property is in foreclosure. You need to leave before the authorities force you out." Foreclosure. The words slammed into me harder than the icy wind. This house in Brookline was everything to me. It was a 5-bedroom Victorian with intricate gingerbread trim that I had designed myself back in 1988. When Richard died 4 years ago, I was drowning in grief, barely able to function. Marcus had come to me with documents, talking about tax strategies and estate planning. He said he was a financial advisor, a genius with investments, and that he would handle the burden of property management so I could focus on healing. I trusted him. I signed the papers he put in front of me. I thought I was signing management agreements, but apparently I had signed away everything I owned. I swallowed hard, tasting bile in the back of my throat. My hands were trembling, partly from the cold and partly from the sheer terror of being homeless at 73. "Marcus, please," I said, my voice cracking with desperation. "It's 18 degrees out here. There's a snowstorm coming tonight. Just let me stay in the guest room. I'll be gone by morning. I just need one night to figure out where to go." Marcus laughed, a dry, cruel sound that seemed to echo off the frozen street. "There's no guest room for you anymore, Victoria. You're a liability. We can't have you here when the appraisers come through. You're bad for the resale value." He glanced at his expensive watch as if I was nothing more than a boring appointment in his busy day, as if destroying someone's entire life was just another task to check off his list. I looked past him desperately, searching the hallway for any sign of my daughter, Sophia, my only child, the little girl I had raised alone after Richard's death. I had paid for her education at Boston University. I had walked her down the aisle when she married Marcus. When he started his investment firm, I was the one who gave them the capital to get started, draining my retirement account because I believed in family. I believed in helping those you love. Then I saw her. Sophia stepped out from the kitchen into the hallway. She was wearing a heavy winter coat, and her face looked pale, almost gray. For a brief moment, relief flooded through me. I thought she was coming to stop this insanity. I thought my daughter, my flesh and blood, would tell Marcus to back off and let her mother inside. "Sophia," I called out, taking a step toward the porch steps. "Sweetheart, please. Talk to him. This is madness." She didn't look at Marcus. She looked directly at me, and her eyes were filled with something I couldn't quite read. Was it pain? Was it anger? In her hands, she clutched a large black garbage bag. It looked heavy and full, and there was a tear in the side where something gray was poking through. She walked past Marcus and stood at the edge of the porch, right where I had planted the winter roses last spring. The steps were slippery with ice, the same steps I had climbed thousands of times over the decades. She stared down at me, and for just a second, I saw tears forming in her eyes. But then her expression hardened into something I had never seen before, a mask of pure rage that transformed her face into something unrecognizable. "Take your garbage," she screamed, her voice so loud it caused a dog to start barking 3 houses down. She pulled the heavy bag back and hurled it at me with all her strength. The bag was heavier than it looked. It hit me square in the chest, knocking the wind out of my lungs. I stumbled backward, my feet slipping on the icy pavement, and I nearly fell. I caught the bag instinctively, clutching it against my body just to keep my balance. It smelled musty and old, like the attic. "Take your trash and get out of our lives," she yelled again, her voice breaking into a shriek that cut through the winter air. "Don't you dare come back here. Don't call us. Don't write to us. Just disappear, Victoria. We don't want you anymore." The silence that followed was deafening. All I could hear was the sound of sleet hitting the pavement and my own ragged breathing. I stood there, frozen in shock. This was the daughter I had rocked to sleep every night when she had nightmares. This is the girl who held my hand at her father's funeral and promised we would always be there for each other. Now she was looking at me with what seemed like pure hatred burning in her eyes. Marcus put his arm around her shoulders, a smug, satisfied smile on his face. "You heard her, Victoria. Time to go." He slammed the front door shut with a finality that made my heart stop. The deadbolt clicked into place with a sound that echoed in my chest. Then the porch light went out, leaving me standing in the dim gray afternoon light, alone and discarded. I stood there for what felt like an eternity. The cold was seeping through my thin coat, settling into my bones. My knees, which had been aching for years, started to throb with a pain that radiated up my spine. I looked down at the black garbage bag in my arms. Through the rip in the plastic, I could see fabric from one of Richard's old work shirts, the blue one he used to wear when he worked in the garden. They had thrown my husband's clothes at me. They had packed up the memories of the man I loved and thrown them at me like refuse. I glanced at the house next door. Mrs. Patterson was watching through her blinds. She had lived next to us for 18 years. She knew me. She knew Richard. She had come to our barbecues and borrowed sugar for her pies. But she didn't come outside. She didn't offer help. The blinds snapped shut, and she turned her back on what was happening, unwilling to get involved in the ugly scene playing out on my driveway. A shame so deep it felt like it was burning my insides washed over me. I was a woman who had built her life on dignity and hard work. I paid my bills on time. I volunteered at the community center. I donated to charities. And now I was a 73-year-old woman standing in the freezing rain with a garbage bag, kicked to the curb by her own daughter and son-in-law. I bent down slowly, my joints protesting every movement, and picked up my handbag from where it had fallen. It was soaked through, the leather stained with icy slush. I adjusted the garbage bag under my other arm. I should have left it there. I should have dropped it on their perfect lawn as a final statement of defiance. But seeing Richard's shirt poking through the tear, I couldn't do it. I couldn't leave his things in the mud, even if my own daughter had thrown them away like trash. I turned and started walking down the driveway. Every step felt like I was wading through cement. The slush soaked through my shoes, instantly numbing my toes. I walked past the mailbox I'd painted last summer in a cheerful yellow. I walked past the maple tree I'd planted when Sophia was 6 years old. I remembered lifting her up so she could touch the lowest branch. Now that tree towered over the street, its bare branches clawing at the gray sky like skeletal fingers. I reached the sidewalk, and turned left toward Commonwealth Avenue. The wind picked up, blowing snow directly into my face. I kept my head down, not wanting anyone to see me. I didn't want anyone to recognize Victoria Hayes, the respected architect, looking like a homeless woman wandering the streets. My mind was racing, trying to piece together what had just happened. How could Marcus have foreclosed on the house? It was paid off. I had paid off the mortgage 15 years ago. The house was worth at least $900,000 in today's market. Where did all that money go? And Sophia, my sweet Sophia. How could she stand there and watch him do this to me? How could she throw that bag at me with such venom in her eyes? I walked for what felt like miles, but was probably only 8 blocks. My destination was the bus stop near the old shopping center. My car was gone. Marcus had sold it 3 weeks ago, claiming the engine was failing, and it would cost more to repair than it was worth. He said he would lease me a new one, something reliable for a woman my age. That never happened. Another lie in what I was now realizing was a long chain of deception. I finally reached the bus shelter. It was a small, plexiglass structure covered in graffiti, offering almost no protection from the wind. I collapsed onto the cold metal bench, my chest heaving as I tried to catch my breath. I was shivering uncontrollably now, my whole body shaking from the cold and the shock. I set the garbage bag down on the wet pavement next to me and stared at it with a mixture of disgust and heartbreak. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out my wallet with trembling fingers. I needed to see what I had left. I needed to assess the damage. I counted the cash inside. 3 $20 bills and 2 $5 bills. $70. That was it. That was my entire net worth after working for nearly 50 years. After saving and planning and building a life, I had designed buildings that still stood tall across Boston. I had created homes for hundreds of families. And now I had $70 and a bag of old clothes. I checked my banking app on my phone, my frozen fingers fumbling with the screen. Account restricted. Contact branch immediately. The message glared at me in angry red letters. Marcus must have done something. He had power of attorney. He had access to everything after Richard died, and I was too grief-stricken to manage things myself. A hot tear rolled down my cheek, burning against my frozen skin. I wiped it away quickly, refusing to cry where people might see. I wouldn't give them that satisfaction. I wouldn't break down in public. A bus pulled up, its brakes hissing and screeching. It wasn't heading anywhere specific, just moving west, away from the expensive neighborhoods, away from my past. The driver opened the doors and looked at me with tired, sympathetic eyes. "You getting on, ma'am?" he asked gently. I nodded, grabbing my handbag and the garbage bag. I struggled up the steps, my body screaming in protest. I fed $4 into the fare machine, watching precious cash disappear. "Where to?" the driver asked, his voice kind. "Just away," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "Just take me away from here." I moved toward the back of the bus and sat down, clutching the garbage bag against my chest for warmth. The bus lurched forward, and I watched through the foggy window as the familiar streets of Brookline blurred into the distance. I didn't know where I would sleep tonight. I didn't know how I would eat tomorrow. All I knew was that my life as I had known it was over. But as I sat there holding that plastic bag, feeling the weight of the unknown contents inside, I had no idea that my life wasn't ending. I had no idea that the bag my daughter threw at me wasn't meant as an insult. It was meant as a lifeline, a desperate act of love disguised as cruelty. If you feel my words, show your support by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. And tell me from which city you belong, so I can see how far a woman's impactful voice can reach. Help me build this community so we can bring more truthful stories for you. I got off the bus 4 miles down the road at a place called the Restwell Inn. It was one of those motels where the neon sign buzzed loudly and half the letters were burned out, leaving it reading Rest L Inn. The paint was peeling from the walls. And there were 3 beat-up cars scattered across the parking lot. It wasn't the kind of place I would normally even glance at, but desperation has a way of changing your standards. I walked into the small lobby, which smelled of burnt coffee and cleaning chemicals. The clerk was a young woman with headphones around her neck, scrolling through her phone. She barely looked up when I approached the counter. I asked for a room for one night. She told me it was $42 plus tax. I counted out my remaining cash on the chipped counter. 3 20s and 2 5s. After paying, I was left with less than $20 to my name. She handed me a physical key attached to a faded green plastic tag and gestured toward the back of the parking lot. "Room 117, she said, her voice flat and disinterested. I walked through the sleet to the room, my shoes squelching with every step. The door was swollen from moisture, and I had to put my shoulder into it to get it open. Inside, the room was freezing. The heater under the window rattled and coughed, pushing out barely lukewarm air. The carpet was a suspicious brown color, and the bedspread looked like it hadn't been washed in months. But it was dry, and it was out of the wind. For now, that was enough. I dropped my handbag on the floor and sat heavily on the edge of the mattress, which sagged under my weight. My knees ached and popped. I stared at the black garbage bag still clutched in my left hand. I hated that bag. It represented everything that had gone wrong. My daughter Sophia had thrown it at me like I was nothing, like I was garbage to be disposed of. I felt a wave of anger rising in my chest. I wanted to march outside and throw the bag into the dumpster I'd seen near the office. I didn't want their pity. I didn't want their cast-offs. I stood up and grabbed the plastic knot at the top, fully intending to do exactly that. But as I lifted it, the weight surprised me again. It was heavy, far heavier than old clothes should be. And then reality hit me. The motel room was barely 50 degrees. I was shivering in my thin coat, and night was falling. My pride was screaming at me to throw it away. But my survival instinct whispered that I needed warmth. If there was a sweater or a coat inside, I needed it to survive the night. I sat back down and slowly untied the knot. The plastic tore easily, brittle from the cold. I reached inside and pulled out the first item. It was a cardigan, soft gray wool with delicate pearl buttons. I froze. It had belonged to Richard's mother, Eleanor. She had given it to me years ago. I brought it to my face and inhaled. It still smelled faintly of lavender and the rose garden Eleanor used to tend. I pulled out another item, a pair of gardening pants worn at the knees, then a flannel shirt Richard used to wear on Sunday mornings when he made pancakes for Sophia. My throat tightened with emotion. Sophia hadn't just thrown random clothes at me. She had thrown her father's things, items filled with memory and meaning. Why would she do this? Why would she be so deliberately cruel? I dug deeper into the bag, my fingers searching for something warmer to wear. The bag was packed tightly, layer upon layer of fabric. As I reached toward the bottom, my fingers brushed against something hard and rectangular. It wasn't cloth. It felt like cardboard, rigid and solid. I pushed the clothes aside and peered into the bottom of the bag. Taped securely to the very bottom with thick layers of silver duct tape was a shoebox. It was an old box, battered and worn, the kind that had once held work boots. I frowned, confused. Why would Sophia tape a shoebox to the bottom of a garbage bag full of her father's clothes? I reached in and tried to pull it free, but the tape was incredibly thick. I had to use my nails to peel back the edges, fighting with the stubborn adhesive. It took nearly 10 minutes of struggling, my breath misting in the cold air, before I finally tore the box free from its prison. I set the box on the worn bedspread and stared at it. It was heavier than it should be. My heart was beating faster now, though I didn't understand why. Maybe it was just curiosity. Maybe it was the strange, desperate hope that I was missing something important. I peeled off the remaining strips of tape that held the lid down. My hands were shaking, partially from cold and partially from anticipation. I lifted the lid slowly, half expecting to find more old keepsakes or photographs. The first thing I saw was money. Bundles of it, not neat, bank-wrapped stacks, but rubber-banded piles of bills, 10s, 20s, 50s, all used and worn. The kind of cash you accumulate over years from small sales, yard work, odd jobs. I stared at it in disbelief, my mouth falling open. I reached out with trembling fingers and touched one of the stacks. It was real. I quickly grabbed one bundle and counted it. $500. There were at least 30 bundles in the box. I did the math in my head, my brain struggling to process what I was seeing. There had to be at least $15,000 here in loose cash. My hands started shaking so violently, I nearly dropped the money. Where did Sophia get this? Why did she give it to me? And why did she throw it at me in a garbage bag while screaming at me to disappear? I set the cash aside carefully on the bed, laying out the bundles like precious artifacts. Underneath the money was a small navy blue book. I recognized it immediately. It was a passbook savings account, the old-fashioned kind that banks rarely issued anymore. I opened it with trembling hands. The name on the account was Victoria Hayes, my name, but I had never opened an account at Riverside Trust Bank. I flipped to the last page of entries. The date of the final deposit was 4 years ago, just 2 weeks before Richard died. The balance listed was $680,000. I gasped out loud, the sound echoing in the empty motel room. $680,000, plus the $15,000 in cash on the bed. This was a fortune. This was more money than I had ever seen in one place in my entire life. Memories came flooding back like a tidal wave. I remembered Richard sitting at our kitchen table late at night, working on his laptop. He had been selling vintage items online, things he found at estate sales and auctions. He always told me he was putting a little money aside for emergencies, for a rainy day. I remembered him warning me about Marcus. Richard had never liked him. He said Marcus's smile was too practiced, too perfect. He said there was something cold behind his eyes. "Victoria, you need to be careful with that man," Richard had said to me just 3 weeks before he passed. He was already weak from the cancer, his voice thin and raspy. "Marcus is a predator. Don't let him anywhere near the house deed. Don't let him touch our finances." I had dismissed Richard's concerns. I told him Marcus was family, that he was a professional, that he genuinely wanted to help. I was so naive. I was so trusting. Then I remembered 4 years ago, sitting in the study with Marcus just weeks after Richard's funeral. He had poured me a glass of wine. The documents were spread across the desk like a trap. "It's just paperwork, Victoria," he had said, his voice smooth as silk. "It's a financial power of attorney for estate planning purposes. It allows me to handle the property taxes and investment accounts, so you don't have to deal with the stress. You just focus on healing. Let me carry this burden for you." I had signed. I had signed every document he placed in front of me, because I was drowning in grief, and he offered me what looked like a life raft. I didn't read the fine print. I didn't see that I was signing over the deed to my house, granting him total control of my assets, giving him the legal authority to sell everything I owned. I had been a fool, a grieving, trusting fool. I looked back at the shoebox. There was one more thing inside, tucked beneath where the passbook had been. A small piece of paper, folded into a tight square. It looked like it had been torn from the back of a bill. I unfolded it carefully. The writing was scrawled in bright red lipstick, smudged in places as if it had been written hastily, maybe in a bathroom or a closet where no one would see. I recognized the handwriting immediately. It was Sophia's. "Mom," the note began. My heart clenched. "Don't trust anything you saw today. Marcus has the house bugged. He has cameras in the living room and kitchen. He monitors everything we say." I read the line again, my skin crawling with disgust. Bugs. Cameras. In my own home. The note continued. "He thinks you're broke. He thinks he's won. But he doesn't know about this account. Dad set this up 11 years ago. He made me promise to keep it secret until you really, truly needed it. He knew, Mom. He knew Marcus would try to take everything." A tear slid down my cheek and dropped onto the paper, smudging the lipstick slightly. Richard. My wise, protective Richard. Even after death, he was still taking care of me. I kept reading, my hands trembling. "Marcus is in serious trouble, Mom. Terrible trouble. He owes money to dangerous people. He gambled away everything. Our savings, the business accounts, everything. He sold the house to pay off part of the debt, but it wasn't enough. He's planning to have you declared mentally incompetent on Monday morning. He already has the court documents prepared. He wants to commit you to the state facility in Waltham so he can collect on a life insurance policy he took out on you last year." The state facility. My blood ran cold. It was a place where forgotten people went to die, a warehouse for those society had discarded. Marcus was going to lock me away and wait for me to die so he could cash in on my life. The final lines of the note were written with such force that the lipstick had broken, leaving streaks of red wax on the paper. "This money is yours, Mom. It's untraceable. He doesn't know it exists. Don't call me. He checks my phone records. Take this money and hire the best lawyer you can find. Destroy him, Mom. Make him pay for what he's done. I love you more than anything." It was a really sad night. I lowered the paper slowly, my whole body shaking. The silence in the motel room felt different now. It wasn't the silence of despair anymore. It was the silence before a storm. I love you more than anything. I thought about Sophia on the porch, screaming at me, throwing the bag, the wild look in her eyes. She wasn't betraying me. She was performing. She knew Marcus was watching through his cameras. She knew he was listening. She had to make it look real. She had to throw me out convincingly to protect me, to get this money into my hands without Marcus suspecting anything. My daughter hadn't abandoned me. She was fighting for me. She was trapped in that house with a monster, playing a dangerous game to keep me alive. My daughter went in and banged it down the store. She knew he was listening. She had to make it look real. She had to throw me out convincingly to protect me, to get this money into my hands without Marcus suspecting anything. My daughter hadn't abandoned me. She was fighting for me. She was trapped in that house with a monster, playing a dangerous game to keep me alive. My daughter hadn't abandoned me. She was fighting for me. She was trapped in that house with a monster, playing a dangerous game to keep me alive. My daughter hadn't abandoned me. She was fighting for me. She was trapped in that house with a monster, playing a dangerous game to keep me alive. My daughter hadn't abandoned me. She was fighting for me. I looked at the passbook showing $680,000. Nearly $700,000 total. I stood up slowly and walked to the cracked mirror hanging over the small dresser. I looked at my reflection. I saw an old woman with gray hair and red swollen eyes. I saw someone who had been beaten down, kicked to the curb, discarded. But as I stared into my own eyes, I saw something else beginning to ignite. It was a spark I hadn't felt since Richard died. It was the fire of the woman who had designed award-winning buildings, the woman who had negotiated with contractors and city officials, the woman who had built things that lasted. I picked up one of the bundles of cash and squeezed it tightly in my fist. He was wrong. I wasn't helpless. I was trash. I was a widow, and I was now a woman with nearly $700,000 and a clear roadmap to my enemy's destruction. Strong I carefully placed the money back into the shoebox. I put the passbook in my coat pocket, right against my heart. I folded the note and tucked it into my shoe for safekeeping. I wasn't going to sleep tonight. I had work to do. Monday was 3 days away. Marcus was planning to end my life on Monday, to lock me away and wait for me to die. Well, he was in for the surprise of his life. Because by Monday, I was going to be the one ending his freedom, his reputation, and his twisted plans. I turned off the flickering overhead light and sat in the darkness, watching the red glow of the motel sign flash through the thin curtains. I watched the snow continue to fall outside the window, and for the first time in a very long time, I didn't feel the cold. I felt the fire burning inside me, and it was burning hot and bright. I stared at my phone, sitting on the stained nightstand. It felt like a tracking device, a leash that Marcus could use to find me. If Sophia was right, and he was monitoring everything, that phone was a beacon leading him straight to me. I made my first decision as a woman with resources and a plan. I powered down the phone completely, walked into the bathroom, and dropped it into the toilet tank. Let him track me to room 117 at the Restwell Inn after I was long gone. I took $400 from the cash stash in the shoebox and shoved the rest back into my handbag, burying it deep beneath my personal items. I needed to move, and I needed to stay invisible while I figured out my next steps. I walked nearly a mile through the bitter wind to a 24-hour pharmacy. My legs ached with every step, but I pushed through the pain. I bought a prepaid phone, the kind that didn't require any personal information, and a detailed map of Massachusetts. I felt slightly ridiculous, a 73-year-old woman playing spy, but the fear in Sophia's note had been very real. Next, I needed transportation. I couldn't rent a car from a major company like Hertz or Enterprise because they required credit cards, and credit cards left digital trails that Marcus could follow. I found a small used car lot on the edge of town called Budget Auto Sales. It was surrounded by a chain-link fence and rows of older vehicles with handwritten price tags on the windshields. The owner was a man named Lou who wore a stained baseball cap and didn't ask questions as long as the cash was real. I put down $800 as a deposit on a 12-year-old Honda Civic that smelled like French fries and air freshener. The car was ugly. The paint was faded, and the heater made a strange rattling noise, but it was anonymous, and it ran. It was perfect for what I needed. I drove away from the lot feeling a surge of something I hadn't felt in years. Freedom. For the first time in 4 years, I was making my own decisions without asking Marcus for permission or approval. I was driving my own car, on my own terms, toward my own destination. My destination was 30 minutes away in a town called Meadowbrook. I was heading to Peaceful Pines, a senior living community. It sounded pleasant enough, but it was essentially an expensive waiting room. My old friend Janet Morrison lived there. Janet and I had worked together for over 20 years at the same architecture firm. She had been a real estate attorney before retiring, one of the sharpest legal minds I'd ever known. She had represented developers, fought zoning boards, and won cases that seemed impossible. If anyone knew how to handle a predator like Marcus, it was Janet. I found Janet in the community lounge, sitting in a wheelchair near a large window overlooking a small garden. She looked older than I remembered, more fragile, her hands resting on a crocheted blanket across her lap. My heart sank. Had I come too late? Was her mind still sharp, or had age taken that away too? "Janet," I said softly, approaching her chair and touching her shoulder gently. She turned her head slowly. Her eyes were cloudy at first, but as they focused on my face, something shifted. Recognition sparked, and a slow smile spread across her weathered face. "Victoria Hayes," she said, her voice raspy but strong. "I thought you were dead. You look terrible." "I feel terrible, Janet," I replied, pulling up a chair beside her. "I need your help." Janet listened intently as I told her everything. I told her about the foreclosure, the eviction in the freezing cold, the garbage bag Sophia had thrown at me, and the note. When I showed her the passbook and the bundles of cash, her eyes widened. The fog of retirement seemed to lift from her completely. She sat up straighter in her wheelchair, her attention laser-focused. "Richard set this up," Janet muttered, running a gnarled thumb over the passbook. "Smart man. Very smart." She looked at the deposit history. "Look at these entries, Victoria. These deposits are structured deliberately. He was selling those antiques and collectibles online, right? He was funneling the profits into this account, keeping it completely off the books and out of Marcus's reach. He was building you a life raft while you were busy trusting a shark." She looked at me, her expression deadly serious. "Do you understand what this means, Victoria? It means you have resources. And in any war, resources are ammunition." Janet wheeled herself over to a small desk in the corner of her room. She pulled out a sleek laptop that looked surprisingly modern for someone living in a senior facility. "You think I just sit here doing puzzles?" she asked, catching my surprised expression. "I still have contacts, Victoria. I still have access to databases and people who owe me favors. You want to know who Marcus Chen really is? Let's find out." For the next 5 hours, I watched a master strategist at work. Janet made phone calls, her voice commanding respect and action as she barked orders at private investigators and old colleagues in the county clerk's office. She typed furiously, accessing legal databases and financial records I didn't even know existed. I sat on the edge of her bed, eating tasteless applesauce a nurse had brought in, waiting anxiously for answers. Around 4 in the afternoon, Janet stopped typing. She spun her wheelchair around to face me, and her expression was grim. The playful spark was gone, replaced by the hard, calculating look of an attorney who had seen the darkest side of human nature. "It's worse than we thought, Victoria," Janet said quietly. "Much, much worse." "Tell me," I said, bracing myself for the truth. "Marcus Chen is not a successful financial advisor," Janet began, her voice cold and factual. "He's a fraud. He hasn't closed a legitimate investment deal in over a year. That fancy office downtown? It's leased, and he's 4 months behind on payments. The luxury car? Leased and about to be repossessed. But that's just scratching the surface." Janet tapped a printed document she'd pulled from her printer. "Your son-in-law has a severe gambling addiction, Victoria. Not casino gambling or horse racing. He's been pouring money into cryptocurrency speculation and unregulated online trading platforms. He's been chasing losses for 3 years, and when he ran out of his own money, he started looking for other sources." She looked at me with sympathy in her eyes. "He owes $3.2 million, Victoria. And he doesn't owe it to a bank or a legitimate creditor. He owes it to a network of international loan providers, the kind of people who don't send collection letters. These are people who use intimidation and worse." I felt the blood drain from my face. $3.2 million. "But the house," I stammered. "It was paid off. It was worth $900,000. Janet nodded slowly. "It was, until 8 months ago. Marcus forged your signature on a home equity line of credit. He cashed out 90% of the home's value using fraudulent documents. He forged the notary seal, too. I have a friend at the county recorder's office who pulled the digital files. The signature is a decent forgery, but there are inconsistencies. He used that money to pay the interest on his gambling debts. But then he gambled the rest away, too. Now the bank is foreclosing because he hasn't made a single payment on the loan he took out in your name." Her voice dropping lower. "How can it possibly be worse?" I whispered. Janet handed me another document. It was a court filing dated for the following Monday. "He's running out of time, Victoria. The loan sharks are closing in. The bank is taking the house. He needs a large payout, and he needs it immediately." She paused. "He took out a life insurance policy on you 18 months ago. $2 million. I stared at her, horror washing over me in waves. "He wants me dead." "Not directly," Janet said. "That would raise too many questions, bring too much scrutiny. No, his plan is more calculated and far more cruel. She showed me the court filing. He's filed an emergency petition for legal guardianship. He's claiming you have advanced dementia and that you're a danger to yourself. He has a doctor who signed an affidavit stating you're mentally incompetent. I looked at the paper. In the matter of Victoria Hayes' petition for involuntary commitment. The hearing was scheduled for Monday morning. If he wins this hearing, Janet explained, he gets total legal control over you as a person. He can commit you to a state-run facility, the cheapest one available. He can medicate you heavily until you actually do lose your cognitive abilities. And then when you conveniently die from natural causes within 6 months to a year, he collects the $2 million insurance payout and pays off his debts. The room spun around me. My own son-in-law, the man who sat at my dinner table, the man who called me mom, wasn't just stealing from me. He was planning to erase me, to lock me away in a nightmare and wait for me to die. That's why he threw you out into the cold, Janet continued. He needed to create a narrative, a pattern of behavior. A confused old woman wandering the streets in the freezing weather. If the police had picked you up that night looking like a vagrant, it would have been perfect evidence for his case. Look, Your Honor, she's homeless, she's confused, she doesn't even know where she is. I stood up, my hands clenched into fists. The rage I felt was so intense, it was blinding. I wanted to drive back to Brookline and confront him, to make him pay for what he'd done. Sit down, Victoria, Janet commanded, her voice sharp and authoritative. I looked at her, breathing hard. You can't fight him with anger, Janet said firmly. He's younger, he's desperate, and he's dangerous. If you confront him physically, you'll end up arrested and he wins. We have to beat him at his own game. We have to beat him in court and destroy his credibility completely. What do we do? I asked, my voice shaking with fury. Janet smiled, but it was a predator's smile, cold and calculating. First, we need evidence, hard, undeniable evidence that will stand up in court. We need the original documents he forged. We need records of his gambling debts. We need proof of everything, and we need it before Monday morning. But his office is locked, I said. He has security. Janet chuckled, a dry sound. He's a gambler, Victoria. Gamblers get sloppy. They make mistakes, and you're an architect. You understand how buildings work, how security systems function, how to access places people think are secure. Janet reached into her desk drawer and pulled out a small bottle of whiskey. She poured 2 small amounts into paper cups. You're going to go undercover, Victoria. You're going to walk right into that lion's den, and you're going to get the evidence we need to send him to prison for 20 years. I looked at my old friend and colleague. I looked at the legal files on her lap that detailed the systematic destruction of my life. I picked up the paper cup filled with amber liquid. Monday is in 4 days, Janet said, raising her cup. Let's get to work. We clinked our cups together. The whiskey burned as it went down, but it felt like fuel igniting inside me. Marcus Chen wanted to declare me incompetent. He wanted to paint me as a confused, helpless old woman. He was about to discover just how sharp and determined this old woman could be. I stood in a narrow alley behind a hardware store, pulling the zipper of gray coveralls up to my neck. The rough fabric scratched against my skin. I looked at my reflection in the side mirror of the Honda Civic. I barely recognized the woman staring back. I was wearing a faded baseball cap pulled low and heavy work boots I'd bought from a thrift store. In my hands, I carried a plastic spray bottle filled with blue window cleaner and a worn cloth. I looked exactly like what I was pretending to be, invisible, a cleaning person, a nobody. Janet had obtained the uniform through one of her contacts, someone who managed cleaning crews for downtown office buildings. She'd told me the schedule. The regular cleaning staff for Marcus's building took their lunch break between noon and 1. That was my window, 60 minutes to break into his office, find the evidence I needed, and get out before anyone realized I wasn't supposed to be there. I drove the Honda into the city, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I had designed office buildings in this city. I had walked scaffolding 40 stories up when I was younger. I had never been afraid of heights or challenges. But this terrified me on a level I'd never experienced. If I got caught, Marcus would have everything he needed to commit me. He would call the police, claim his mentally unstable mother-in-law had finally lost her mind, and I'd be locked away by sunset. I parked 4 blocks away and walked to the glass tower where Chen Financial Consulting rented space on the 12th floor. The lobby was all polished marble and gleaming brass. People in expensive suits rushed past, talking into wireless earpieces. I kept my head down, clutching my cleaning supplies like a shield of invisibility. I walked directly toward the service elevator, my heart pounding so hard I thought everyone could hear it. The security guard at the desk glanced up at me briefly. My whole body tensed. This was it. This was where my plan would fall apart. I gave him a tired nod, just one working person acknowledging another. He didn't even blink. He just buzzed me through without a second thought. I was invisible to him, just another cleaning worker not worth noticing. The elevator ride to the 12th floor felt like it lasted forever. I watched the numbers climb slowly. 8, 9, 10, 11. I adjusted the small recording device Janet had given me, hidden in the pocket of my coveralls. The tiny red light blinked, indicating it was recording everything. The doors finally opened. The office hallway was quiet and empty. The reception area was deserted. Janet had been right. Marcus liked to take long lunches at an expensive restaurant downtown, projecting an image of success he no longer had. His assistant usually took her break in the staff room. I walked quickly across the plush carpet, my work boots making almost no sound. I went straight to Marcus's corner office. The door was unlocked. Arrogance. He thought he was untouchable, too smart to be caught. I slipped inside and closed the door softly behind me. The office smelled of expensive cologne and leather, the same scent that had turned my stomach when he threw me out of my house. I didn't waste time looking at the view of the city. I went directly to the most obvious place people hide things they want to destroy: the trash. The bin was a sleek stainless steel container under his mahogany desk. I looked inside carefully. It wasn't empty. There was a pile of shredded paper, cross-cut into tiny pieces. I reached in and grabbed a handful. Even shredded, I could see fragments of text, pieces of a notary seal, what looked like parts of my signature sliced into ribbons. He had been practicing. He'd been destroying the draft versions of the forged documents. I pulled out a large plastic bag from my pocket and carefully collected all the shredded paper. Janet knew someone who specialized in document reconstruction. It would take time, but we had the pieces of the puzzle. Next target, his computer. I sat in Marcus's leather chair. It felt wrong, like sitting on a throne of lies and betrayal. I moved the mouse, and the screen came to life. Password required. I pulled out the burner phone and called Janet. She answered immediately. "I'm in, Janet," I whispered. "I need the password." "Try Sunset 2020, she said calmly. I typed it in. "Access denied. Try Investment Guru," Janet suggested. Denied. My palms were sweating inside the thin gloves I was wearing. The clock on the wall ticked loudly. I'd been in the office for 12 minutes. It felt like 12 hours. "Think, Victoria," Janet said in my ear. "He's a narcissist. What does he value most?" "He values money," I said. "Try millionaire." Denied. I looked around desperately. My eyes landed on a framed photo on his desk. It was a picture of Sophia, smiling, taken before Marcus had drained the life from her eyes. "Try Sophia's birthday," I said, feeling sick. 071992. I typed it in. The screen unlocked. I felt a wave of rage so intense it almost paralyzed me. He had used my daughter's birthday as the password to access the computer he used to destroy our lives. I pulled out the USB drive Janet had prepared for me. It was loaded with software that would automatically copy browser history, download folders, and most importantly, his accounting files. I plugged it in. A progress bar appeared. Copying files. 20%. I tapped my foot anxiously. I kept glancing at the door. 40%. Come on, I whispered to myself. Then I heard it. The soft ding of the elevator down the hall. Footsteps. Click, click, click. High heels on polished marble. Someone was coming back early. I froze, my hand hovering over the keyboard. 60%. The footsteps grew closer, stopping at the reception desk. I could hear papers rustling, mail being sorted. 75%. The footsteps started again, coming down the hallway toward the executive offices. My heart felt like it would explode. 90%. I yanked the USB drive out, just as the screen flashed complete. I shoved it deep into my pocket. I grabbed my spray bottle and looked frantically for somewhere to hide. The desk was open underneath, no cover. The curtains were too sheer. The door handle began to turn. I dove toward a supply closet in the corner of the office, pulling the door shut behind me just as the main door opened. I was in complete darkness, squeezed between file boxes and Marcus's winter coats. I held my breath, pressing my hand over my mouth to muffle any sound. "Hello?" a woman's voice called. It was the assistant. "Mr. Chen, are you here?" Silence. I heard her walking to the room, her heels clicking on the hardwood. She was putting something on the desk, probably mail or messages. She paused. I prayed she wouldn't notice the chair was slightly turned or that the computer screen was still warm. The phone on Marcus's desk rang suddenly, the shrill sound making me jump. She didn't answer it. She walked back out, closing the door behind her. I let out a shaky breath. I reached for the closet door handle, ready to escape while I had the chance. But then the office door burst open again. Harder this time. Heavier footsteps. Marcus. He was back. He must have returned early, or I'd missed him somehow. I shrank back into the coats, trying to make myself as small as possible. If he opened this closet, if he found me here, everything was over. I heard him pacing, his breathing heavy and labored. He sounded like a trapped animal. He picked up his phone and dialed. I fumbled for the recording device in my pocket, making absolutely sure it was still running. "Pick up," Marcus muttered desperately. Then he started talking, his voice loud and frantic. "Richard, listen to me. I know I'm late on the payment. I know. Just please listen." Silence, as he listened to whoever was on the other end. "No, please don't send anyone to the house. Sophia's there. She doesn't know anything about this. This is between you and me." My blood turned to ice. He was talking to the loan sharks, the dangerous people Janet had warned me about. "I have a solution," Marcus said, his voice rising with panic. "It's handled. I have a buyer for the property. Yes, the Brookline house. We're closing Thursday morning." Thursday. That was tomorrow. I'd lost track of the days. "Yes, I know it's worth $900, but I'm selling it for $575. A fast sale to investors. They're bringing a cashier's check. I'll have your money by Friday afternoon, I swear. Just call off your people." He was selling my home for pennies on the dollar, just to get fast cash. He was throwing away over $300,000 in equity to save himself. But what he said next made me forget about the house entirely. "Yeah, the old woman's been handled," he said into the phone. "No, she won't be a problem anymore. She's homeless right now, probably sleeping in a shelter somewhere. But by Monday, she's gone permanently." He laughed, a dry, cruel sound I'd heard before. "I have the paperwork ready. The psychiatrist signed the evaluation this morning. Advanced dementia, aggressive behavior, danger to herself. She's going to the state facility in Waltham, the maximum security ward. Once she's in the system, she loses all legal rights. She becomes a ward of the state, and I keep power of attorney over everything. I pressed my ear against the wood, tears of pure rage streaming down my face. He wasn't just stealing from me. He was planning to erase my entire existence. The best part, Marcus continued, the life insurance, $2 million. But I have to wait 8 months for it to pay out as natural causes. So she just has to survive 8 months in that place. Honestly, the medication they use or the stress will probably finish her off by then anyway. Win-win for everyone. He hung up. I stood in the darkness, shaking uncontrollably, not from fear, but from a hatred so pure it felt like it could incinerate everything around me. I heard him pour a drink, the sound of crystal clinking. Then he sighed heavily. "Karen," he called out to his assistant, "I'm going to the gym for an hour. Hold all my calls." I heard the door open and close. I waited, counting to 30 in my head. Then I burst out of the closet. I didn't care about being quiet anymore. I just had to get out of that office before I did something I'd regret. I ran through the side door that led to the emergency stairwell. I didn't wait for an elevator. I ran down 12 flights of concrete stairs, my boots echoing in the enclosed space. My lungs burned. My knees screamed in protest. But I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. I burst out into an alley, gasping for air. The cold winter wind hit my sweaty face like a slap. I stripped off the gray coveralls right there next to a dumpster, revealing my regular clothes underneath. I threw the cap into the trash. I walked as quickly as my trembling legs would carry me back to the Honda. I got into the car, locked all the doors, and sat there trying to catch my breath. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely hold the steering wheel. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the recording device. I pressed rewind, then play. "She's going to the state facility in Waltham. Once she's in the system, she loses all legal rights." Marcus's voice, small but crystal clear, filled the car. I had him. I had his confession. I had proof of the gambling debts, proof of the fraud, proof of his plan to commit me. But I also had a new deadline. Thursday, tomorrow. Marcus was selling my house tomorrow morning. If that sale went through, I'd lose the property forever, even if I eventually sent Marcus to prison. I looked at the dashboard clock. It was 2:15 in the afternoon on Wednesday. I had less than 24 hours to stop him. I started the car, my mind racing through possibilities. I wasn't going back to the motel. I was going straight to Janet. We had the evidence. Now we needed a plan to spring the trap. Marcus Chen thought he was selling a house tomorrow. He thought he was buying his freedom with my life savings. But he was about to discover that he'd sold his soul, and I was going to be the one to collect payment. I sat in the same plastic chair in Janet's room at Peaceful Pines, staring at the wall clock as the second hand ticked past the 12. It was 2:45 on Wednesday afternoon. My hands were still shaking from the break-in, but my mind was crystal clear, focused on a single problem. We had evidence and we knew Marcus's timeline, but Sophia was still trapped in that house with a desperate, dangerous man who was spiraling out of control. She needed to know I was safe. She needed to know I'd found the money and that help was coming. Most importantly, she needed to know the nightmare would end tomorrow. But I couldn't call her. Janet had confirmed that Marcus monitored the landline, and Sophia's cell phone was on a family plan he controlled. Any text I sent would be visible to him immediately. Any call would be recorded. I needed a way to communicate that would fly completely under his radar, something analog in a digital world. I looked at Janet, who was busy analyzing the files I'd stolen from Marcus's computer. "Janet," I said, breaking the silence, "I need to order a pizza." Janet stopped typing and looked at me over her reading glasses, one eyebrow raised. "We're in the middle of planning a legal takedown, Victoria, and you're thinking about food? The cafeteria serves dinner at 5. "Not for us," I said, standing and beginning to pace the small room. "For Sophia. The night before. I explained my idea. Back when Sophia was a teenager and Marcus first started dating her, there was always a disagreement about pizza toppings when he'd join us for family dinners. Marcus was rigid and controlling even then. He wanted pepperoni or plain cheese, and he was obnoxiously opinionated about it, calling anything else disgusting. But Sophia and I had a secret favorite that we'd share when he wasn't around: pineapple and jalapeno. The combination of sweet and spicy. Marcus absolutely hated it. He refused to even be in the same room when we ate it, calling it an abomination. If a pineapple and jalapeno pizza showed up at the house at 3:30 on a Wednesday afternoon, Marcus wouldn't touch it. He'd be disgusted. He'd probably retreat to his office or leave the house entirely. But Sophia would know immediately. She'd know instantly that it came from me, that I was alive and thinking of her. Janet's expression shifted from confusion to understanding, then to admiration. "It's a Trojan horse," she said with a slight smile. "Clever." I used my burner phone to call a local pizzeria in Brookline that I knew delivered to our neighborhood. I placed the order carefully. 1 large pizza, pineapple and jalapeno. "Yes, I know it's an unusual combination." "No, I'm sure." "Name for the order?" the young man on the phone asked. "Put it under Victoria," I said clearly, so Sophia would see it on the receipt. "Any special instructions?" "Yes," I said, my voice steady and deliberate. "I need you to write something on the inside of the box lid." "Can you do that?" "Sure, we do that sometimes for birthdays. What do you want it to say?" I paused, choosing my words carefully. "Write this exactly. The cavalry arrives Thursday. Stay strong." I paid using cash I'd drop off at the restaurant beforehand, keeping everything untraceable. Then Janet and I waited. The next hour felt like the longest of my life. I paced Janet's small room while she continued working on the legal documents we'd need. I imagined the delivery driver pulling up to the house I used to own. I imagined the doorbell ringing, Marcus answering with irritation. At 3:45, Janet's computer pinged softly. She'd managed to access the cloud account for the security system Marcus had installed in the house. She pulled up the feed from the front hallway camera. The video was grainy, but clear enough. "Look," Janet said, pointing to the screen. I leaned in close, my heart pounding. I saw Marcus standing in the foyer, holding the pizza box at arm's length like it contained something toxic. He was clearly yelling, though there was no audio on this particular feed. He shoved the box towards Sophia, who was standing near the staircase, looking confused and frightened. She took the box hesitantly. Then she opened it. I held my breath, watching her face on the pixelated screen. She looked at the pizza, then lifted the lid higher to see the message written inside. She went completely still. She stared at those words for what felt like an eternity. Then, very slowly, she looked up directly at the camera lens, as if she somehow knew I was watching from across the city. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She gave the slightest, almost imperceptible nod, just a tiny movement of her head. But it was enough. She understood. She had received my message. She closed the box and walked calmly toward the kitchen, her posture just a bit straighter than it had been moments before. "She knows," I whispered, feeling a massive weight lift from my chest. She got the message. 15 minutes later, the video feed showed Marcus grabbing his coat and storming out the front door. His face twisted in anger and agitation. The pizza had clearly upset him, though he had no idea why it had been sent. As soon as he was gone, Janet switched to a different window on her laptop, showing Marcus's text messages that were syncing to his cloud backup. A new message had just been sent from Marcus to someone labeled only as R in his contacts. "Wife is having a breakdown. Packing everything like a crazy person. Too much chaos. Staying at the office until the closing tomorrow. Can't deal with the stress." I smiled for the first time in days. Sophia was brilliant. By acting erratic and upset, She was forcing Marcus to distance himself from the house. She was making him sloppy, making him careless. She was clearing the battlefield for us. Now that communication was established, we had to address the main threat. The sale of the house, scheduled for tomorrow morning. We can't just file a legal injunction, Janet said, swiveling her chair to face me. Even with all our evidence of fraud, a court order to halt the sale could take 48 to 72 hours to process through the system. Marcus is selling to cash investors tomorrow morning at 10. That's less than 20 hours away. If that sale closes and the new owners register the deed, getting your house back will require years of litigation, and there's no guarantee you'd win. So we call the police, I suggested. We send them to the closing with our evidence. Janet shook her head firmly. Too risky. If Marcus sees police, he'll run. Or worse, he might destroy the original forged documents before we can seize them as evidence. We need to cut off his oxygen supply. We need to remove his motivation for selling. His motivation is the debt, I said. He owes $3.2 million to loan sharks. Exactly, Janet replied, her eyes gleaming with strategic brilliance. And in the world of high-risk lending, debt is a commodity. It can be bought, sold, and traded just like stocks or real estate. Janet pulled up a file on her screen, showing information about a company called Apex Recovery Solutions. This is the shell corporation the lending network uses to hold their high-risk debts, she explained. Legally, they're registered as a debt collection agency. They're holding the paper on Marcus's gambling losses. To them, Marcus is a toxic asset. He's 3 years behind on payments. He has no assets in his own name. He's a high probability of total default. If he goes to prison or flees the country, they recover nothing. So, I asked, trying to follow her logic. Janet leaned forward. So to them, getting 40 cents on the dollar is a gift. Getting 25 cents is better than zero. She looked at me seriously. Victoria, you have nearly $700,000. It's a lot of money. It's your security. But I can make a call. I know the attorney who represents Apex. I can offer to buy Marcus's debt. Buy it? I repeated, startled. Why would I want to own his debt? Because if we buy the debt, you become his creditor, Janet explained. We step into the shoes of the loan sharks. We can freeze the sale of the house, not as a family dispute, but as a secured creditor, exercising our legal rights. We can walk into that closing tomorrow morning and legally seize the funds before Marcus even touches them. I sat back, stunned by both the brilliance and the risk of the plan. But it will cost a significant amount of money, I said slowly. Janet nodded. I'll offer them $450,000 cash, immediate wire transfer, for the entire $3.2 million debt. They'll accept it, Victoria. They believe Marcus is never going to pay. $450,000 is like finding money on the street for them. $450,000. It was nearly 2/3 of what Richard had saved for me. It was money meant for my future, for my security in old age. If I spent it, I'd be left with only $250,000 plus whatever we could recover. But then I thought about my house. I thought about the oak tree in the front yard. I thought about Sophia throwing that bag to save me, risking everything. I thought about Marcus calling me incompetent, planning to lock me away until I died so he could cash a check on my life. This wasn't about money. This had never been about money. This was about taking back control of my life and protecting my daughter. Do it, I said firmly. Buy the debt. Janet didn't hesitate. She picked up her phone and dialed from memory. She put it on speaker so I could hear. A smooth, professional voice answered after 3 rings. This is Benjamin Carr. Benjamin, this is Janet Morrison. I haven't spoken to you since the waterfront development case. How are you? There was a pause. Janet Morrison, I heard you'd retired. I'm surprised to hear from you. What can I do for you? I just wanted to talk to you about an offer from an investor interested in acquiring a distressed debt portfolio from Apex Recovery. Janet said smoothly, slipping into her lawyer voice effortlessly. Specifically, the obligations of one Marcus Chen. Silence on the line, then a dry chuckle. Marcus Chen? That account is a disaster. The guy's completely underwater. Why would your client want that worthless paper? And my client specializes in aggressive recovery tactics, Janet lied smoothly. She believes she can extract value where others have failed. We're offering $450,000 cash wired today. Take it or leave it. I held my breath. $450,000 for a $3.2 million debt. It seemed impossible that anyone would accept such a low offer. Hold please, Benjamin said. The line went silent. We waited. Every second felt like an hour. I stared at the speakerphone, praying silently to Richard, asking him to guide us through this. Benjamin came back on the line. We accept. Wire instructions are being sent to your secure email now. Once funds clear, the promissory note, all security interests, and attached liens transfer to your client immediately. Pleasure doing business, Janet. It was done. Janet looked at me, her expression a mixture of triumph and concern. It's done. Now we need to send the money. Strong period ends. We drove to a major bank branch in downtown Boston. I walked in wearing my best coat, trying to project the confidence of money regularly. I sat down with a personal banker, a young professional woman who looked at my identification and then at the passbook from Riverside Trust. N strong P, B, /break period, ends. I need to wire $450,000 to this account, I said, sliding the wire instructions Janet had printed across the desk. She typed on her computer for a moment, then looked up with a slight frown. Ma'am, this is a substantial transfer. May I ask the purpose? It's a business investment, I said calmly, keeping my voice steady. Debt acquisition. She studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. I'll need you to sign here, here, and here. She pointed to several lines on the transfer authorization form. I signed my name, Victoria Hayes, with a steady hand. With each stroke of the pen, $450,000 of Richard's carefully saved money disappeared into the digital void, transferred to people I'd never met for a debt I never wanted. Transfer complete, the banker said, handing me a receipt. The funds have been sent. I walked out of the bank feeling both lighter and heavier simultaneously. I had just spent a fortune, but I had purchased something invaluable: control. Marcus's fate was now in my hands. I walked back to where Janet was waiting in the Honda. We did it, I said quietly, showing her the receipt. Janet smiled, a fierce, predatory expression. Congratulations, Victoria. You now own a $3.2 million debt. You're officially the shark. I looked at the receipt, at the proof of what I'd just done. Marcus Chen thought he was answering to criminals, to thugs who would hurt him if he didn't pay. He had no idea that his new creditor was the old woman he'd thrown out into the freezing cold, the woman he tried to destroy. Thursday morning was 18 hours away. Marcus was going to walk into that real estate closing, expecting a check that would save his life. Instead, he was going to find me waiting for him, and I was going to collect every single dollar he owed, with interest and consequences he couldn't even begin to imagine. Thursday morning arrived with a sky that looked like brushed steel, heavy and oppressive. Light snow was falling, dusting the streets of Boston with a thin layer of white. But inside the conference room of Hamilton Title and Escrow Company, the air was warm and thick with tension I could feel even before I walked through the door. I stood in the hallway, adjusting the cuffs of my new charcoal gray suit. It had cost me $1,800 at an upscale boutique yesterday afternoon. The seamstress had worked late into the night to alter it perfectly for me, her eyes widening when I'd paid in cash. It was the finest suit I'd ever owned, tailored and professional. I looked at my reflection in a framed piece of artwork on the wall. The woman looking back was not the shivering, desperate person who'd been thrown out days ago. This woman looked powerful. This woman looked like someone who commanded respect. Next to me, Janet checked her watch. She was wearing her courtroom suit, a navy ensemble she'd kept from her practicing days. On her, it looked like armor. She carried a leather briefcase bulging with documents we'd spent all night preparing. She gave me a sharp, confirming nod. It was time. Inside the conference room, Marcus sat at the head of a polished table. He was sweating despite the air conditioning, repeatedly tapping an expensive pen against a leather portfolio. The rhythm betrayed his nervousness, his desperation. Emily sat next to him, looking small and pale. She was twisting a tissue in her hands, playing her role perfectly. Across from them sat a man in an ill-fitting suit with a calculating smile. The investor, the predator Marcus had found to buy my house for far less than it's worth. The title agent, a tired-looking woman, pushed a stack of documents toward Marcus. "We just need signatures here. Here and here," she said, pointing with a perfectly manicured nail. "Then the cashier's check will be released." Marcus reached for the papers, his hand trembling slightly. This was the moment he'd been desperately waiting for. This was the $575,000 that would keep the loan sharks from breaking his legs, maybe even save his life. He picked up his pen. The tip hovered over the signature line. I pushed open the conference room door. It didn't slam. It opened with a smooth, heavy sound that commanded everyone's attention immediately. Marcus looked up. His eyes went wide with shock. The pen fell from his fingers, clattering across the table and leaving a streak of ink across the documents. "Victoria," he stammered, blinking rapidly as if he couldn't process what he was seeing. He'd been expecting a homeless woman. He'd been expecting a confused, broken old lady in dirty clothes. He was not expecting the woman in the $1,800 suit standing in the doorway with a briefcase and an attorney. "What are you doing here?" Marcus asked, his voice rising in pitch. "You're supposed to be at the shelter. I mean, you should be resting. You're not well." He stood up, knocking his chair backward. He looked frantically at the title agent and then at the investor. "I apologize. This is my mother-in-law. She's not well. She has dementia. She wanders. I need to call someone to take her back." I didn't respond. I walked calmly into the room, my heels clicking on the polished floor. I walked past Marcus, completely ignoring him, and pulled out the chair at the opposite end of the table. I sat down deliberately, unbuttoning my jacket with slow, controlled movements. "I'm not wandering, Marcus," I said, my voice calm and clear. "And I'm certainly not confused." Marcus's face flushed an ugly shade of red. He looked at Sophia desperately, but she was staring at her hands, hiding the smallest hint of a smile. "You can't be here," Marcus hissed. "This is a private closing. This is business. Get out, Victoria, before I have you removed." I leaned back in the chair and folded my hands calmly. "I'm afraid that's not going to happen," I said evenly. "You see, I'm here because I'm purchasing the house." The investor across the table laughed, a harsh, dismissive sound. "Lady, we have a contract. Unless you've got $575,000 in your purse, you're wasting everyone's time." I looked at the investor steadily. "I'm not buying it from you," I said, pointing at him. "And I'm certainly not buying it from him," I added, shifting my finger toward Marcus. Marcus looked like he might have a stroke. "What are you talking about, you crazy old woman? You have $70 to your name. You're homeless." Janet stepped into the room, closing the door firmly behind her with a solid click. She walked to the table and dropped her heavy briefcase with a thud that made everyone jump. "My client is not purchasing the property from you, Mr. Chen," Janet said in her most authoritative lawyer voice. "She's seizing the asset." Janet opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of legal files. She slid them across the table with practiced precision. They fanned out in front of Marcus like damning evidence. Marcus looked down at the documents. The color drained from his face instantly, leaving him a sickly, grayish-white. He recognized the logo on the top file, Apex Recovery Solutions. "What is this?" Marcus whispered, his voice barely audible. That, Janet said crisply, is your debt. All of it. The $3.2 million you owe for your gambling addiction. The principal, the compounding interest, the penalties. Every single cent. Marcus looked up at me. Horror and realization dawning in his eyes. You bought my debt, he choked out. I nodded slowly. As of yesterday afternoon, I am the sole owner of your promissory note. I am your creditor now, Marcus. And I'm calling in the loan immediately. The room went completely silent. The investor looked from me to Marcus, clearly sensing the deal was falling apart. What does this mean? He asked nervously. It means, Janet said, turning to address the title agent directly, that Mr. Chen does not have the legal authority to sell this property. As the secured creditor, Mrs. Hayes has exercised her right to place an immediate lien on all of Mr. Chen's assets, including this house, which was illegally encumbered using fraudulent documentation. Janet slapped an official court order on top of the pile of documents. This is an emergency asset freeze order, signed by a judge at 8 o'clock this morning. No assets can be transferred. No money changes hands. This sale is void. Marcus made a sound like a wounded animal, a desperate, broken noise. He stared at the cashier's check sitting on the table, the check that was supposed to save him. It was so close, just inches from his trembling fingers. You can't do this, Marcus screamed, slamming his hands on the table. That's my house. I have a buyer. I need that money. You need the money to pay the people who threatened your life, I said calmly, not raising my voice. But you don't owe them any more, Marcus. You owe me. And unlike them, I'm not interested in breaking your legs. I'm interested in breaking your freedom. The investor stood up abruptly, buttoning his jacket. I'm out, he said flatly. I don't touch properties with liens and fraud issues. Call me when you sort out your family problems. He grabbed his briefcase and walked out, leaving the door swinging behind him. Marcus watched him leave, his mouth opening and closing silently. The money, his escape, his salvation. Was walking out the door. He was trapped in a room with the woman he'd tried to destroy, and that woman now owned his entire life. If you feel my words, show your support by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. And tell me from which city you belong, so I can see how far a woman's impactful voice can reach. Help me build this community so we can bring more truthful stories for you. Marcus turned to Sophia, desperation clear in every line of his face. She was sitting quietly, her hands folded, her expression unreadable. He must have thought she was still the compliant, frightened woman he'd controlled for years. Sophia, baby, please, he begged, reaching toward her but stopping short of actually touching her. Your mother's lost her mind. Look at what she's doing. She's destroying our future. Tell them to stop this. Tell them we need to sell the house so we can start over. Just you and me, like we always planned. I watched my daughter carefully. For years, I'd seen her shrink under his manipulation, watched her voice get quieter, her spirit dim. I was terrified she might break, that years of conditioning would be too powerful. But Sophia stood up. She didn't do it quickly or dramatically. She stood with slow, deliberate grace. A movement that seemed to suck all the oxygen from the room. She smoothed the front of her dress and looked Marcus directly in the eyes with an expression I'd never seen on her face before. Cold, absolute indifference. She reached into her handbag and pulled out a small velvet pouch. Marcus's eyes locked onto it, a flicker of hope crossing his face. Maybe he thought she was offering him something to pawn or sell. She turned the pouch over, and a ring slid into her palm. It was her wedding ring, a large solitaire diamond that caught the light from the conference room windows. Do you know how I found out the truth, Marcus? Sophia asked, her voice soft, but cutting through the silence, like a blade. I took this ring to a jeweler last week to have it cleaned and resized. I've lost weight from all the stress you've put me through. Marcus's face went from pale to ashen. He opened his mouth, but no sound emerged. in pale. Then Sophia continued, taking a step closer to him. He told me he doesn't clean costume jewelry. He said this was cubic zirconia. A decent fake, but worthless. She took another step. You sold my real wedding ring, didn't you? You sold the ring you put on my finger when we made vows to each other. You replaced it with glass while I was sleeping. You probably gambled away the money the same day, in Paris's. Sophia, I was going to buy it back, Marcus whispered, tears beginning to leak from his eyes. I just needed one good win. I did it for us. In Paris's. For us? Sophia repeated, her voice rising with anger. There's no us, Marcus. There's only you and the mountain of lies you've built to hide your addiction. She pulled her arm back and threw the ring. It hit Marcus hard on the cheekbone, leaving a red mark before bouncing off and clattering onto the table with a hollow plastic sound. But that's not even the worst part, Sophia said, her voice shaking now with emotion. The worst part is that you're not just a thief. You're a fool. Marcus rubbed his cheek, looking at her with confusion and growing fear. What are you talking about? Sophia pointed a trembling finger at me. Do you remember last Sunday, Marcus? Do you remember the snow and the ice? Do you remember forcing me to throw my own mother out into the freezing cold? Do you remember the garbage bag? Marcus frowned, confused. The garbage bag? That was just trash. Old clothes. What about it? Sophia let out a laugh that sounded slightly unhinged. It wasn't trash, Marcus. That bag contained the only thing in that house worth anything real. She took a deep breath. I didn't throw my mother out. I threw her a lifeline. And you were too busy feeling powerful to even check what was inside. What was in the bag, Sophia? Marcus asked, his voice barely a whisper. Sophia smiled, cold and triumphant. Almost $700,000. Cash and a savings account. Dad's insurance policy for Mom. Everything was hidden in a shoebox taped to the bottom. I threw it to her so you wouldn't find it, so she could use it to destroy you. Marcus's eyes bulged. He stared at Sophia, then at me, then back at Sophia. $700,000, he repeated, his voice rising to a scream. You threw away $700,000? He grabbed at his hair, pulling it. You stupid, stupid woman. That was my money. I'm your husband. That belonged to me. It was never yours, I said, my voice low and dangerous. It belonged to Richard, and now it belongs to me, the woman who bought your pathetic life. Marcus was hyperventilating, the reality crashing down on him. He had held the solution to all his problems in his hands and thrown it into the street. The realization broke something fundamental inside him. The mask of the civilized businessman shattered completely. He let out a roar of pure rage. He didn't look at me. He looked at Sophia. In his twisted mind, she was the reason for his destruction. You did this, he screamed. You ruined everything. He lunged at her. He moved faster than I expected, launching himself across the space between them with his hands reaching for her throat. Sophia screamed and stumbled backward, tripping over her chair. I didn't think. I didn't hesitate. Pure instinct took over. I grabbed the briefcase Janet had set on the table. It was heavy, packed with documents and files. I swung it with all the strength I had, all the power built from years of carrying blueprints and materials on job sites. The briefcase connected with the side of Marcus's head with a sickening thud. He went down hard, crashing to the floor and sliding across the polished surface. He hit the leg of the table and lay there, dazed and groaning. Stay down, I commanded, standing over him with the briefcase, raised for another strike if necessary. Sophia had scrambled backward until she hit the wall. She was shaking, gasping for air, but she was safe. Before Marcus could try to get up again, the door burst open. 2 security guards rushed in, summoned by the title agent who'd pressed a panic button under the table. They didn't hesitate. One grabbed Marcus's arms, twisting them behind his back. The other placed a knee on his back, pinning him to the floor. "Secure," one guard said, calmly. Marcus was still struggling. Screaming obscenities, cursing Sophia, cursing me, cursing the entire world. But he was pinned, helpless, powerless. I set down the briefcase and leaned heavily against the table, my heart racing, adrenaline flooding my system. Janet was immediately at Sophia's side, helping her up, guiding her to a chair in the corner away from Marcus. I looked down at my son-in-law. His face was pressed into the carpet, his expensive suit rumpled and dirty. He looked pathetic, broken, nothing like the confident predator who destroyed my life days ago. "You can't do this to me," Marcus spat, his voice muffled by the carpet. "I'll sue you. This is assault. I'll have you arrested." I crouched down slowly, my knees protesting. "Sue me?" I said quietly. "With what money, Marcus? You have nothing. You have a $3.2 million debt hanging over your head that I own. No lawyer will take your case." I leaned closer so only he could hear me. "Listen very carefully, because I'm only saying this once. You put your hands on my daughter. You tried to hurt her. That changes everything." Marcus stopped struggling. He looked at me with one eye visible, filled with fear. "I bought your debt to control you," I continued, my voice dropping to barely a whisper. "I bought it to save my house and expose your crimes. But now I'm going to take your freedom." I tapped the floor near his face. "I have evidence of every fraudulent document you created. I have recordings of you planning to commit me to a facility so you could collect insurance money on my death. I have forensic accounting showing every dollar you stole. I have enough to bury you for 20 years. Marcus swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. "And while you're in prison," I continued, "I'll make sure every single inmate knows exactly what you are, a man who stole from his family, a man who tried to hurt a woman. Your life will be a living hell. Do you understand me?" I asked. Marcus nodded slightly, his cheeks scraping against the carpet. "Yes," he whispered. "Good," I said, straightening up with effort. I looked at the security guards. "Call the police. I'm pressing charges for assault and attempted battery." As the guards made the call, I walked over to Sophia. She was pale but steady, Janet's arm around her shoulders. I sat down next to my daughter and took her hand. It was cold and trembling. "It's over, sweetheart," I said gently. "It's finally over. You're safe now." Sophia looked at me, tears streaming down her face, and for the first time in years, I saw my daughter smile. A real, genuine smile that reached her eyes. "I knew you'd come," she whispered. "I knew you'd save us." 20 minutes later, 2 police officers arrived and took Marcus away in handcuffs. As they led him out, he looked back at me one final time. There was no arrogance left, no smirk, no superiority, just fear and the dawning realization that his entire world had collapsed. The title agent, clearly shaken by everything she'd witnessed, quietly closed the file on the sale. "This transaction is void," she confirmed officially. "The property remains in Mrs. Hayes's name pending resolution of the legal issues." Janet gathered our documents, her expression satisfied. We had won. We had stopped the sale, protected Sophia, and ensured Marcus would face justice. As we walked out of the building into the cold Boston afternoon, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not happiness yet, that would come later, but peace. The war was over, and we had survived. The drive back to Brookline felt different from any drive I'd taken in years. The gray sky had begun to clear, revealing patches of pale blue. The snow had stopped, and weak winter sunlight was breaking through the clouds, making the ice-covered trees sparkle like they were decorated with diamonds. I drove the Honda Civic up the driveway of my house, the same driveway where I'd been humiliated and thrown out less than a week ago. But this time, I didn't feel shame. I felt victorious. I parked the car and turned off the engine, letting the silence of the neighborhood wash over me. It wasn't the silence of abandonment anymore. It was the silence of home, of safety, of a battle won. Sophia was in the passenger seat, clutching her purse with both hands, staring at the house with an expression that mixed relief and exhaustion. "We're home," I said softly, reaching over to squeeze her hand. She looked at me, and tears began streaming down her face again. But this time, they were tears of release, of freedom. "I didn't think I'd ever be able to come back here and feel safe again," she whispered. "You're safe now," I assured her. "He can't hurt you anymore. He can't hurt either of us." We walked to the front door together, arm in arm. The lock was the same, but the feeling of turning the key was entirely new. I pushed the door open, and we stepped inside. The house was quiet, empty of Marcus's oppressive energy. He had taken his personal belongings, his gadgets, his presence, but the soul of the house remained. The hardwood floors I'd helped install decades ago gleamed in the afternoon light. The crown molding I'd designed myself still framed the rooms with elegance. The house felt empty in one way, void of the chaos and fear Marcus had brought. But it also felt full, filled with memories that predated him. Memories of Richard and Sophia and a life built on solid foundations of love and hard work. Sophia walked into the living room and sank onto the sofa, kicking off her shoes and curling up, just like she used to do as a teenager on movie nights. I sat in my old armchair, the one Marcus had tried repeatedly to throw out because it didn't fit his modern aesthetic. We sat there in comfortable silence, just listening to the house settle around us. Then Sophia began to talk. It started slowly, hesitantly, but then the words came faster, like a dam breaking. She told me about the terror of living with Marcus over the past 3 years. She described nights when he would pace the floors, muttering about odds and percentages. She told me about his explosive temper when things didn't go his way, how he'd punch walls and throw objects, always careful never to actually hit her, but making sure she knew violence was always just one bad bet away. In strong P. "He never physically hurt me, Mom," she said, her voice shaking. "But he controlled everything. What I wore, where I went, who I talked to. He monitored my phone, my email, everything. I stayed because I was terrified of what he'd do to you if I tried to leave. He always threatened to cut you off, to make sure you ended up homeless and alone. He used you as leverage against me every single day." In strong P. I listened, my heart breaking for my daughter, understanding now the impossible position she'd been trapped in. "When he told me about his plan to have you declared incompetent and committed," Sophia continued, tears flowing freely, "I knew I couldn't wait any longer. I knew I had to act. Mom's money, the account Dad set up, was the only weapon I had left. I had to get it to you, and I had to make Marcus believe I was on his side so he wouldn't suspect." She looked at me with red, swollen eyes. "Throwing that bag at you, screaming those horrible things, it was the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. Seeing the hurt in your eyes almost destroyed me. But I knew if I didn't make it convincing, if Marcus suspected for even a second that I was helping you, he would have stopped everything." I moved from my chair to sit beside her on the sofa, wrapping my arms around her. "You saved us, Sophia," I said firmly. "You were braver than I ever could have been. You played a dangerous game with a dangerous man, and you won." We held each other and cried, not tears of sadness, but tears of release, washing away the fear, the manipulation, and the pain of the past years. Later that evening, we sat at the kitchen table with notebooks and pens, planning our next steps. The financial situation was complex, but manageable. I had spent $450,000 of the $700,000 to buy Marcus's debt, leaving me with about $250,000, plus whatever we could recover from selling Marcus's luxury items, which Janet had already arranged to have seized as assets. "First priority," I said, making a list. "We restore this house. Not the way Marcus wanted it, all cold and modern. We bring it back to what it was, what it should be, Sophia nodded enthusiastically. "I want to paint the kitchen yellow again," she said. "The way Dad always wanted it, warm and welcoming." "Yellow it is," I agreed, smiling. "But there's something else I want to do with the remaining money, Sophia. Something important." I explained my idea. I wanted to establish a foundation in Richard's name, dedicated to helping elderly people who had been victims of financial exploitation and fraud. I wanted to use our experience, our pain, to help others who found themselves in similar situations, trapped by family members or caregivers who saw them as opportunities rather than people deserving of dignity. "We'll call it the Richard Hayes Protection Fund," I said. "We can use it to provide legal assistance, emergency housing, financial counseling. We can help people fight back against those who prey on them." Sophia's eyes lit up with genuine excitement for the first time in years. "Dad would have loved that," she said. "He would be so proud." "And I know exactly who should run the legal side," I added. "Janet. She's been dying of boredom in that retirement community. This would give her purpose again." The next morning, I drove back to Peaceful Pines. I found Janet in the activities room, half-heartedly working on a jigsaw puzzle that looked mind-numbingly boring. I sat down across from her and slid a folder across the table. "What's this?" Janet asked, her eyes narrowing with interest. "It's a job offer," I said. "I'm starting a foundation to help seniors who've been financially exploited. I have seed money. I have a mission, but I need someone who knows the law inside and out, someone who isn't afraid of a fight, someone who can be absolutely ruthless when necessary." Janet opened the folder and read through the proposal I drafted. I watched her face transform. The boredom dissolved, replaced by the sharp focus of someone who'd just been given a purpose worth fighting for. "You can't pay me much," Janet said, though there was no complaint in her voice, just acknowledgement of financial reality. "I can pay you in purpose," I replied, "and I promise better coffee than what they serve here." Janet closed the folder and tapped it with her finger decisively. "I'll need an office," she said, a smile spreading across her face. "A real one, with a proper desk and a computer that actually functions. And I'll need a budget for private investigators." "Done," I said, grinning. "Welcome to the team, counselor." That night, Sophia and I had our first real dinner in the dining room in years. There were no caterers, no expensive wines, no pretense. Sophia made pot roast with carrots and potatoes, following Richard's old recipe that we'd both loved. The house smelled of rosemary and comfort and home. We sat at the table where we'd celebrated birthdays and holidays for decades. The chair where Marcus used to sit didn't feel like a void or a wound. It felt like a space that had been cleared of something toxic, making room for healing. "This is good, Mom," Sophia said, taking a bite of the pot roast. "This is really, really good." "It is," I agreed. I raised my glass of water in a toast. To Richard, who protected us even after death. To courage when it mattered most. And to new beginnings. Sophia raised her glass, tears shining in her eyes but a smile on her face. To Dad, to us. To freedom. The sound clear and pure, like a bell signaling the end of a nightmare and the beginning of something better. Over the following weeks, our lives began to take shape again. The criminal charges against Marcus moved forward rapidly. With the evidence we'd collected, the forged documents, the recorded confession, and the testimony from financial experts Janet had assembled, the district attorney built an airtight case. Marcus pleaded guilty to multiple counts of fraud, forgery, elder abuse, and attempted assault. He was sentenced to 18 years in federal prison. I didn't attend the sentencing. I didn't need to see him one more time. Sophia did go, though, sitting in the courtroom gallery as the judge read the sentence. She told me later that Marcus had tried to catch her eye, tried to mouth some kind of apology or plea, but she had looked straight ahead, refusing to acknowledge him. That chapter was closed. Spring arrived in Boston with an explosion of life and color. The trees that had been bare and skeletal during my darkest days burst into bloom. Sophia and I spent weekends working in the garden, planting tulips and daffodils in the beds that had been neglected. We painted the kitchen a bright, cheerful yellow that filled the room with warmth and light. We hung new curtains, replaced the cold, modern furniture Marcus had insisted on with comfortable, welcoming pieces that actually felt like home. The Richard Hayes Protection Fund officially launched in May. Janet recruited 2 other retired attorneys who were eager to fight for a good cause. We rented a small office downtown, modest but professional. Within the first month, we had helped 3 elderly clients recover stolen assets and escape exploitative guardianship situations. Each case we won felt like a tribute to Richard, to the man who had loved me enough to protect me from beyond the grave. One Saturday afternoon in June, I stood in my garage, which had become my workshop again. The smell of sawdust and wood stain filled the air. Above my workbench, mounted in a place of honor, was a shadow box I had created. Inside, preserved behind museum-quality glass and mounted on black velvet, was the black garbage bag Sophia had thrown at me. Most people would have burned it, would have destroyed the symbol of their worst humiliation. But I had kept it, carefully preserved it, because I understood something profound. That bag represented the moment when everything changed. It was the vessel that carried hope disguised as hatred, salvation wrapped in cruelty. I stood there looking at it, my hand resting on the smooth wood of my workbench. People say one person's trash is another person's treasure. It's a cliché, something you hear at yard sales and thrift stores. But standing there, I understood it was the deepest truth I'd ever encountered. To Marcus, that bag was garbage, something to be discarded along with the old woman he despised. He looked at it and saw nothing because he was blind to anything that didn't serve his immediate selfish needs. But to me, that torn, ugly plastic bag contained everything that mattered. It held Richard's foresight and love, protecting me years after his death. It held Sophia's courage and sacrifice, risking everything to save my life. It held my freedom, my dignity, and my future. I reached out and gently touched the glass of the shadow box. "Never let anyone define your worth," I whispered to the empty garage. "Never let anyone convince you that you're disposable. Because if they try, if they treat you like garbage, you make absolutely certain of one thing." I paused, remembering Marcus's face when he realized I owned his debt. When he understood, I held all the power. You make sure that when you leave, you take your value with you. You take your strength, your dignity, your power, and you leave them with exactly what they deserve. Nothing but the consequences of their cruelty. I turned away from the shadow box, from the preserved symbol of my past. I walked out of the garage and around to the front of the house. Sophia was there, wearing old jeans and one of Richard's flannel shirts that was too big for her. Her hair was pulled back and she had a smudge of paint on her cheek. She was standing by the front door, holding a can of paint and a brush. We had stripped away the cold black paint Marcus had chosen for the door. The wood beneath was ready for something new. We had chosen the color together, spending an entire afternoon at the paint store looking at samples. "Ready, Mom?" Sophia asked, smiling at me. I smiled back. "Ready." The color we'd chosen wasn't black or gray or any of Marcus's cold, pretentious choices. It was a deep, vibrant red, the color of life, of warmth, of blood, and courage. A color that said, "Welcome home, you are safe here." Side by side, mother and daughter, we began to paint. We covered the scars and the memories with fresh, bright color. We reclaimed our entrance, our home, our lives. The afternoon sun was warm on our backs, and for the first time in years, I felt completely at peace. Sophia caught my eye and smiled, a genuine expression of joy that lit up her entire face. "I love you, Mom," she said simply. "I love you too, sweetheart," I replied, applying a long, smooth stroke of red paint to the door. We worked until the door was finished, gleaming like a beacon in the golden evening light. We stood back and admired our work together. It wasn't perfect. There were brush strokes and small imperfections, but it was ours, created with love and hope. and it was absolutely beautiful. This journey taught me that true value is never found in displays of wealth or power, but in the quiet strength of love and foresight. Marcus saw only a dirty trash bag to be thrown away, but he missed the legacy of protection hidden inside. I learned that dignity cannot be taken by others. It's something we carry within ourselves, even when the world tries to strip it away. We must never underestimate the power of patience and the resilience of those who build their lives on foundations of integrity and love. When we stand together with courage and truth, we can weather any storm and rebuild from any ruin. If you feel my words, show your support by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. And tell me from which city you belong, so I can see how far a woman's impactful voice can reach. Help me build this community so we can bring more truthful stories for you. Because together, we are stronger than any force that tries to break us down. Together, we can transform even our darkest moments into testimonies of hope and redemption.